Alright, in under 2 minutes I'm going to show you what to look for when you're buying a bike. The very first thing is we need to search a YouTube video on how to actually measure chain wear. The bearings between the chains will stretch over time, which means that a chain will wear at the same time as the teeth. When this chain eventually breaks one day because it's remarkably weak, this means that you'll buy a new chain, and because the wear won't actually fit congruently, it actually won't fit on your simultaneously wore out sprockets. So there's a chain wear tool I can show you that will actually measure that. It just falls right into these grooves here, you're fine. One of the most expensive components of a bike actually is its wheels. So you want to go through and give it a good pinch. I'm giving that a lot of force, and actually I can't actually get barely any movement of it. That's about like a millimeter or so. So it's a really good way to actually make sure that everything is tight. When you find them and you can squeeze them a lot, then the wheel's actually not secured very well because every single spoke is held together by tension. The other thing you want to do is watch the calipers, because when the wheel is actually spinning, and let's see if I can do this here. I'm going to give it a good spin. You can barely see a bit of shadow between my brake rotor and the actual rim itself, right? See that silver against the brake? Nothing's actually moving right there. So if you saw a bit of a wobble, then you would know that the wheel's not straight. Cyclists will call that true. How true is the wheel? So here I see the front wheel and the rear wheel, they both spin true. There's actually no bobbing of distance in this space here, right? That fluctuation would show you the wheels aren't straight. A new pair of wheels, a new pair of quality wheels, is going to start around $200 today. So you don't want to buy a bike and have to, produce brand new wheels. You don't want to have to buy a bike and replace the chain and then the gears, right? Once again, you're up to $200. The other thing you need to bear in mind here is this bike the right size for you? So what we have to do here, let me slide this over. We actually need to measure the space from the bottom bracket all the way up to the top of the top tube, right? So here, this is called my seat tube. The majority of ads that you see online, in fact, are not going to have real measurements. It'll give you the generic small, medium, large. This is a problem because it doesn't actually give you what the real measurement is. You've probably bought clothing that's been problematic because it said large, medium, small. Didn't actually tell you what the size really was. Now, on this particular one, you see the seat tube's actually raised, right? For our purposes, we really need to know what the measurement is from here all the way down to the bottom bracket. You call somebody up online, say, hey, I love your ad, but you don't actually tell me what the measurement is. Well, you just walk them through it. Measure in inches or centimeters all the way up to the top. Typically, cyclists will do this in centimeters. It's the more appropriate way. For our purposes, this bike here is about 54 centimeters. So your typical male 5'11", 5'10", maybe 5'9", potentially all the way up to 6'1". Depending on what your inseam is, you could work with this. So my inseam is about 31 inches, and on a 24, my inseam is about 20, oh no, I've gone completely off on that. Sorry, the conversions got me. A 54 centimeter bike will fit me as I have a 31 inch inseam. So don't be so concerned as to the distance off the ground. People will say, oh, the top tube's this many inches off the ground. Well, that doesn't necessarily benefit you. Bottom brackets will have different kind of distances between them and the ground because bikes are built on different sort of geometries. This one is a sprinter's bike. It's more racing oriented. Usually a mountain bike would have typically a higher bottom bracket because, of course, it's going to want to clear different kinds of debris. For our purposes, the biggest thing we want to watch is this triangle here, right? The inner frame. Now you see it's not a perfect triangle here, right? There's a little bit of space. If you look at ads online, you'll actually find out there's a bit of space in between there. And the larger the bike is, the larger the front tube is. So that will actually grow or shrink. If you see a bike with a perfect triangle, or these two tubes here, they actually meet, then you know the bike's teeny tiny, right? Then it's probably a 20-inch frame, maybe a 50 centimeter frame. You know, the tighter that triangle is, the smaller it is. The bigger this gap is, the bigger the bike is. So this is a good benchmark for you to look at that distance. That'll give you an indication of what size that really is. Other things that you want to bear in mind. I think you would be smart to have a basic multi-tool with you. If I were buying this bike, I would want to measure, I would actually want to loosen this 5mm bolt off here and see if I could wiggle my saddle laterally or raise or lower it. People who leave their bike outside and it weathers constantly will actually have a bit of rust between the frame and their saddle tube itself, which is problematic because if this rusted, it would mean that, you know, it would fit perfectly for me, but the next person to buy it, they would have a tremendous problem. Over on the front here, once again, I would want to make sure, regardless of my style, because there are different styles of stems, what I would want to do is loosen the bolts off. This is a modern stem, right? So for our purposes here, we likely wouldn't have to touch or mess with this. But what you would want to do is pick the bike up, give it a good jolt, make sure things are solid, because this portion here called the headset, that's really what the bearings sit on that make your steering wheel turn. So sometimes people who aren't mindful, they'll allow that to wear out, it'll get loose. You'll get a lot of wear in there, right? So if I bought a modern style like this and everything was secure, that's great. If I had the older style that just only has one bolt on top, this is called a quill stem, what you'd need to do would be to loosen that, make sure it allows the handlebars to lower, to increase, and allows the handlebars to move independently of the wheel. Right now this is tight, so we see it's connected. But if you loosened an old style one off completely, and you're turning it, and it were to still turn the wheel with it, that would mean that that's rusted together. Once again, that would instantly mean that that's a lemon, and that it wouldn't be worth your time. If that were to happen, I mean, there's a 1 in 2 chance if you had a whole week where every free hour you were just pounding away with a hammer, you might get it loose. That should be one of the easiest and fastest checks whether or not that bike is there for you, because chances are you need to bring it to a skilled bike mechanic or a bike shop, and it's going to take them the better part of the week to take a shot at it, if they're going to get it. There's no guarantee there. We are watching all of our fatigue spots here for cracks. I don't see any cracks here whatsoever, right? Of course, the weld points are usually the areas where you'd get some kind of impact. Here, everything's in very good condition, right? Here, if we look really closely at some components and parts, we can see some grease and some dust. The chain here is pretty dirty. So this one, it looks like it's been wiped off somewhat. Likely it's been sitting very long. Red flag you want to watch for, once again, you'll probably see bikes where there'll be a whole bunch of splatter and gunk, right? And there are a lot of guys out there who like to put different kinds of lubricants on their bike. Some guys will put different kinds of oils from the auto industry. It's not really intended for that. There's a different kind of weighting to the oil. That just kind of makes things a bit of a mess. So if you get a sense that somebody's bought a bike and there's an issue there, it may come to you visually right away. Another thing you want to do, you want to grab the crank arm on the left side and on the right side, and you want to wiggle them both together laterally. That's going to let you know if your bottom bracket is loose. Once again, if you're grabbing both the crank arms and you're wiggling them laterally, that's going to give you an indication as to whether or not the bottom bracket's loose. If a guy cares for his bike, if a person cares for their bike, that's not going to be an issue. But if it's loose, at worst, it could be a $100, $200, $300 fix. So it's a very easy area to lose points. The final thing you need to consider when you're going out to buy a bike, what do you really have in terms of options for gears? So here I have a double in the front. Let's count in the back. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 sprockets on the back. So we have an 18-speed bike here. Don't go by the speeds. Speeds don't really tell you anything. We want to know what the variation is between the smallest tooth and the biggest tooth. So this is about a 12 by 28 28's great because that allowed me to climb an extremely steep hill, which is really good. Not common with every class of road bikes. Newer ones, they'll have more. Older ones, you could have only a 6 speed freewheel or cassette in the back here, and that would be extremely limited in terms of taking different kinds of rolling hills or whatnot, right? The big thing that I want to watch here for is any kind of missing, loose, broken teeth, things like that, right? Watch the teeth, the front and the back. For our purposes here, this looks pretty good. There is a lot more that I could watch for in terms of picking up a used bike, but this seems to be the best overall case that I found here for getting a used item. I can tell that on a very simple case without having technical knowledge, the saddle's in very good condition. Even things like the saddlebag, I mean, it's a little bit messy, but this person's taken good care of it. Even their tape. I mean, it's got a little bit of staining on it. Of course, it's used, but the wearable parts that are soft, I mean, if there's tears and if things are hanging off, that person doesn't care about their bike. This one, of course, it's been taken very good care of, right? For our purposes here, we can even see that things like cables or whatnot, yeah, they're a little bit messy, but they have a natural groove in them, right? They're not sagging, they're not pinched, so we can tell that this person's bike has been serviced at a good shop. We want to make sure we understand what the gear system is. With this particular bike, you may have thought at a glance that this has STI levers. This is just a classic old brake style, right? Classic pull. With a newer bike, so a bike, you know, built in 90s beyond, it'll have an STI shifter, so you'll actually have to shift in. This style is more of a traditional mechanical function, but it looks newer. It's been updated. The shifting style here is actually down tube shifters. Nothing wrong with this. Fairly dated. Maybe a little bit harder for the new person to take their hand off the bar and have to reach down. Once you get proficient at it, you can do it specifically by feel. A new person might need to be a little bit cautious until they get used to this. Now, usually how this goes, and the routing here will actually be a dead giveaway. My right-hand side is all the rear gears, right? And then this on the left-hand side, this is specifically for shifting up front. So as we gathered from the back here on my rear freewheel, I have about 9 gears here that I can shift with. On the front, my chain rings, I have, well, this is just a double. So I have the option here, right? This is really the most that I would go to in terms of purchasing a used bike. I think I've gone through everything, and I've tried to speak in clear language without getting overly technical. There are a lot of cyclists out there who could add more jargon, more to watch for. This is intended just to give a new person, once again, a basic idea of what they would have to look at when buying a used bike. If you're in Hamilton, Ontario, or the surrounding Hamilton area, Freewheel Cycle is my bike shop of choice. They're fantastic. If you're really wise, you'll actually go there with the seller and say, hey, well, your bike's good, then prove that it's good. Meet me at my local shop so a certified mechanic can give it a free on-the-spot assessment. Don't trust my word, trust the mechanic's word. Sometimes people do this with cars. Why wouldn't you do this with your bike? Much better way to be. Outside of that, you're welcome to send me any kind of questions regarding things you would look for when you're purchasing a used bike. For our purposes here, I thought this was a fairly good demo. Thank you for your time, and good luck on your hunt.